The billionaire's baby cried nonstop in the restaurant until the waitress's 12-year-old black daughter did the unthinkable. "This child is ruining my business dinner," shouted William Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, as his 6-month-old baby wailed in his arms. Customers at the upscale Grandview restaurant turned to stare. "Where's the manager? I need a solution now." Little Emma Sterling had been crying for 40 minutes straight, turning what should have been an $8,000 dinner with Japanese investors into a living nightmare. William had tried everything: expensive bottles, imported toys, even offering money to other tables to move. Nothing worked. "Mr. Sterling, we've already called 3 emergency babysitters," whispered the maitre d' nervously. "But none of them have been able to calm her down." At the investors' table, diplomatic smiles were beginning to fade into thinly veiled irritation. This was the $50 million deal that would secure Sterling Industries' expansion into Asia. That's when Linda Thompson, a 34-year-old waitress who had been working at Grandview for 6 years, approached discreetly. "Mr. Sterling, I could try." "You?" William interrupted with a cruel laugh, looking her up and down. "Please, I've already paid for professional experts." "I don't need amateur advice." Linda backed away but didn't leave. She had seen situations like this before. Her 12-year-old daughter, Victoria, was finishing her homework at a small table in the back. It was the weekend, and the babysitter had called in sick at the last minute. "What's so special about this kid?" One of the investors muttered in Japanese, clearly losing patience. William was desperate. His $2 billion empire had started with Asian investments, and this deal could double his net worth. But Emma screamed on as if her life depended on it. "Linda," he called again, this time without his earlier arrogance. "You said you could try?" "Actually, sir," Linda replied with calm composure, "the one who really understands babies here is my daughter Victoria. She has a special gift with small children." William glanced toward where Linda was pointing and saw a 12-year-old black girl surrounded by advanced math books and an old laptop. His eyes narrowed with contempt. "You're suggesting I hand my daughter over to a child? A child who shouldn't even be here during working hours?" "William," the restaurant manager interjected carefully, "perhaps it would be better to try anything at this point." The humiliation was public and deliberate. William raised his voice so half the restaurant could hear. "Fine. Bring on this junior consultant. But when it doesn't work out, I want both of you out of here immediately and never to return. And Linda, consider your job under review." Victoria Thompson slowly rose, carefully closing a differential calculus book, a subject most college students struggled with. At 12, she was a math prodigy, though few knew it. As she approached, her sharp eyes noticed details the adults had overlooked. The awkward way William was holding Emma. The draft in the restaurant, the clinking of cutlery overwhelming the baby's senses. "May I?" she asked softly, extending her arms. William handed Emma over with an expression of deep skepticism. 5 minutes. After that, you're gone." What happened next defied all expectations. Victoria adjusted Emma into a comfortable position, applied light pressure to the right points on her back, and began humming a soft melody her grandmother had taught her. Within 30 seconds, the crying stopped completely. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Emma opened her eyes. Focused on Victoria's face and smiling for the first time in hours, relaxed completely. How did you do that?" William stammered, staring at the 12-year-old who had accomplished what professional nannies could not. Victoria handed Emma back, showing him how to maintain the same position. She just needed someone to really pay attention to what was bothering her. At the investors' table, chatter broke out in Japanese. They were clearly impressed. Dinner could continue. The deal was saved, but something in Victoria's gaze unsettled William. It was far too mature for her age, as if she were studying him with the same precision she used to analyze the baby. When Linda came to guide her daughter back to her table, William couldn't help asking, What were you studying over there?" "Game theory applied to behavioral economics," Victoria answered casually. "I'm analyzing how irrational decisions by powerful people can create predictable mathematical opportunities for others." William blinked, not fully understanding, but sensing there was far more going on than a child calming a baby. Victoria returned to her books with a slight smile. She had just witnessed firsthand the very arrogance and prejudice she studied in her theories, and what happened after that night would change the lives of everyone involved, especially William Sterling, who had just underestimated the wrong person. Because what that arrogant billionaire didn't know was that Victoria Thompson wasn't just a math prodigy. She was someone who had spent years observing, analyzing, and waiting for the perfect moment to prove that real intelligence has nothing to do with money or skin color. The next day, Linda arrived at work at Grandview and found a completely different atmosphere. The other employees looked at her with a mixture of pity and discomfort, while manager James Morrison called her into his office for a private conversation. "Linda, about what happened last night," he began, avoiding eye contact. "Mr. Sterling called this morning. He was not pleased with the episode involving your daughter." "Episode?" Linda repeated, feeling her blood boil. "You mean when my daughter solved a problem that professional nannies charging $1,000 an hour couldn't solve?" James sighed uncomfortably. He said it was inappropriate to bring a child into the workplace, especially during an important business dinner, and that you acted outside of protocol by allowing a minor to interfere with customers. "Interfere?" Linda laughed bitterly. "Victoria saved his dinner. Linda, you know how it works here. Clients like William Sterling bring in tens of thousands a month. He specifically requested that Victoria no longer appear in the restaurant during your working hours." The humiliation burned in Linda's chest like acid. In 6 years at Grandview, she had been a model employee. She arrived early, stayed late, covered shifts for sick co-workers, yet now she was being punished because her brilliant daughter had embarrassed a spoiled billionaire. "What if I don't agree?" Linda asked, already knowing the answer. James lowered his voice even further. He mentioned moving his corporate events to another establishment. "That's over $200,000 a year in revenue, Linda. The owner can't afford to lose that client." Meanwhile, Victoria was at the public library, where she spent every morning before school. But today, instead of focusing on advanced math books, she was researching Sterling Industries. "William Sterling," she muttered, typing on the library's old computer. Within minutes, she had access to public information, financial reports, press releases, court proceedings. What she found made her eyes widen with interest. Sterling Industries had been sued 5 times in the last 3 years for questionable labor practices, mass layoffs during the pandemic, benefit cuts, and psychological pressure on employees. And in every case, William had used his expensive lawyers to avoid real consequences. "Interesting behavioral pattern," Victoria whispered, jotting it down in her notebook. It was exactly the kind of data she analyzed in her studies of how powerful people abused systems to avoid responsibility. At school, things weren't much better. Her math teacher, Ms. Chun, noticed Victoria's gloomy mood. "Victoria, you seem distracted today. Is there a problem with the exercises?" "No, teacher. Actually, I was thinking about game theory applied to situations of asymmetric power." Ms. Chun blinked, momentarily confused. Even as an advanced math teacher, she sometimes forgot she was dealing with a child who had already mastered college-level concepts. Asymmetric power situations? When one person has disproportionate resources and uses that advantage to intimidate or control others, Victoria explained with calm precision, though her eyes betrayed the storm inside her. "I'm analyzing how these dynamics can be mathematically predicted and corrected." During lunch, Victoria sat alone as usual. But today was different. She wasn't reading. She was observing, studying her classmates' behavior, analyzing how social hierarchies formed and sustained themselves through small acts of inclusion and exclusion. "It's all about information and timing," she muttered, scribbling equations on her napkin. "Power is just information applied at the right moment." That afternoon, when she got home, Victoria found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, still in her restaurant uniform, looking defeated. "Mom, did something happen?" Linda looked at her daughter, this 12-year-old who spoke like an adult and thought like a scientist, and felt her heart tighten. How could she explain that the world was unfair to exceptional people like Victoria? "Mr. Sterling didn't like what happened yesterday," Linda said carefully. "He asked that you not come to the restaurant during my shifts anymore." Victoria was silent for a long time, processing. When she finally spoke, her voice was colder than Linda had ever heard it. He felt threatened. "Victoria?" "No, Mom. That's exactly it." He felt threatened because a 12-year-old black girl solved a problem he couldn't solve with all his money and power. And now he's using his influence to punish our family. Linda saw something in her daughter's eyes that frightened her, a burning intensity far too mature for her age. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. Did you know that Sterling Industries has been sued 5 times for abusive labor practices? That William Sterling personally laid off 300 employees during the pandemic just to keep his executive bonuses?" Linda's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "Research," Victoria replied simply. "It's all public information, just like the fact that he owes $2 million in back taxes and is being investigated for tax evasion." "Victoria, where are you going with this?" Victoria slowly closed her notebook, but not before Linda glimpsed pages filled with equations, graphs, and news clippings. "People like William Sterling commit injustices because they believe there will be no consequences," Victoria said with chilling calm. "They count on their victims not having the resources to fight back." "Victoria, you're scaring me a little. There's no need to be afraid." "Mom, I'm just studying patterns." Victoria smiled, but it wasn't her usual smile. It was calculated. You know, there's a mathematical theory called Nash equilibrium. Basically, it predicts that in any strategic game, eventually all players will find a strategy where no one can unilaterally improve their position. Linda didn't fully understand what her daughter was saying, but something in the way Victoria said it made her stomach clench. "The problem," Victoria continued, "is that William Sterling thinks he's playing a game where he has all the advantages. He doesn't realize I changed the rules by putting myself in the equation." That night, while Linda slept, Victoria stayed up late on her school-issued computer. She wasn't doing homework. She was doing something much more complex, mapping William Sterling's financial, social, and professional structure with the precision of a mathematician and the patience of someone who learned at a very young age that underestimated people always have a crucial advantage. They are invisible until the exact moment they decide not to be. As Victoria worked, a pattern began to take shape in her mind. Not exactly a plan for revenge, but something more sophisticated. An equation in which William Sterling's arrogance would become the variable that destroyed his own result. Because if there's one thing mathematical prodigies learn early on, it's that every system, no matter how powerful it seems, has points of vulnerability. Victoria Thompson had just identified exactly where Sterling was most vulnerable. His unshakable belief that a 12-year-old black girl could never pose a real threat to his perfectly controlled world. 3 weeks after the incident at the restaurant, Victoria was at the public library where she always did her most crucial work. This time she wasn't alone. Beside her, Professor David Kim, a retired mathematician from the local university, examined the calculations Victoria had developed with growing admiration. "Victoria, this is graduate-level work," Professor Kim said, adjusting his glasses as he studied the dozens of sheets she had filled. "Have you really developed a mathematical model to predict corporate behavior patterns?" "Not exactly predict, Professor," Victoria replied with that disconcerting calm. "It's more like identifying systemic vulnerabilities in power structures based on arrogance and prejudice." Professor Kim had first noticed Victoria 6 months earlier when she attended his informal lecture on game theory in the library. A 12-year-old asking questions few adults could formulate had immediately caught his attention. "Show me again how you arrived at these numbers on Sterling Industries," he asked, genuinely fascinated. Victoria opened a meticulously organized folder. Analyses of public financial reports from the last 5 years, cross-referenced with labor lawsuits, mass layoff patterns, and executives' social media behavior. "William Sterling follows an almost perfect mathematical pattern," she explained. "What kind of pattern?" Professor Kim pressed. "He repeats the same errors in judgment every 18 months, always underestimating people he considers inferior, and he records these decisions in ways that can be traced." Meanwhile, at Sterling Industries, William had all but forgotten the restaurant incident. He was consumed by something far bigger. The biggest deal of his career. Mr. Sterling, his assistant reported. The Yamamoto Corporation delegation will arrive next week to finalize the merger. They insisted on dining at the Grand View again? William smiled with satisfaction. Perfect. That place knows its audience. No unnecessary interference this time. What William didn't know was that his arrogance had created an opportunity Victoria was methodically exploiting. Through her research, she'd found something revealing. Yamamoto Corporation held extremely strict corporate values regarding social responsibility and ethical behavior. Professor Kim, Victoria said, showing him a new set of calculations. I need your help with something. Of course, Victoria. What do you have in mind? He asked. How would you make sure specific information reached the right people at the exact moment it would have the most impact? She asked. Professor Kim paused, admiration tempered by concern. Victoria, that sounds elaborate. I'm just applying game theory to a real-life situation, she said. If someone uses power and prejudice as strategies for domination, it creates predictable mathematical vulnerabilities that can be exploited by those who understand the rules. Over the next 2 weeks, small events began to ripple through William Sterling's life, things he at first dismissed. An investigative journalist started asking pointed questions about Sterling Industries' labor practices. William shrugged it off as troublemaking. Then his LinkedIn feed filled with comments from former employees detailing their experiences. PR called it disgruntled ex-workers. Then something more serious followed. The IRS announced a surprise audit of his companies, focusing on the years Victoria had flagged as problematic. Coincidence, William told his accountant. Audits happen at random. In the library, Victoria showed Professor Kim a stack of newspaper articles and social posts that had appeared over the past week. How did you orchestrate all this? Professor Kim asked, impressed. I didn't orchestrate anything, Victoria answered honestly. I identified the right pressure points and provided factual information to the right people. The system regulated itself. What kind of information? Victoria opened a digital folder on her borrowed laptop. Remember I told you that William Sterling documents his own failures? Well, he has a habit of recording executive meetings and making problematic comments about employees, all archived on corporate servers with questionable security. Professor Kim gulped. Victoria? How did you gain access to that? I didn't gain access to anything, Professor. But there's such a thing as anonymous reporting. And when you provide the appropriate authorities with the exact location of information, they have a legal right to investigate. That night, William Sterling received a call that completely robbed him of his sleep. His corporate lawyer was visibly nervous. William, we need to talk urgently. The audit found some irregularities. And there's something else that's even more worrying. What now? Yamamoto Corporation is reconsidering the merger agreement. They received an anonymous dossier with information about the company's labor practices. They want a meeting to clarify some concerns before finalizing any deal. William felt his blood run cold. The deal with Yamamoto was worth $400 million and represented the international expansion he had been planning for 5 years. What kind of information? Audio recordings of executive meetings where you make, let's say, culturally insensitive comments about employees, and documents showing dismissals targeting specific groups. The next day, Victoria was at Grand View with her mother, who had managed to keep her job only because the manager had interceded on her behalf. Linda was still unaware of the events unfolding in William Sterling's life. Honey, you've been very quiet lately, Linda commented as they organized the utensils for the night shift. Is everything okay? Yes, Mom, I'm just observing some interesting patterns manifesting themselves. Linda looked at her daughter curiously, but before she could ask any more questions, the manager approached with a tense expression. Linda, I need to warn you. Mr. Sterling has made a reservation for tonight, a very important meeting with Japanese investors. He specifically requested that his daughter not be present in the restaurant. Victoria smiled in that way that always made Linda slightly uncomfortable. Don't worry, Mom. I'll stay at the library until you finish your shift. What neither of them knew was that Victoria had other plans. The library closed at 9, exactly when William Sterling's crucial meeting would be taking place at the Grand View. At 8:30 p.m., Victoria sent a message from a payphone to a number she had found in Yamamoto Corporation's corporate records. If you want to truly understand who you are doing business with, I suggest you observe how Mr. Sterling treats people he considers inferior. You will be dining at the Grand View tonight at 9 p.m. A demonstration is worth 1,000 reports. As William Sterling prepared for the most important dinner of his career, adjusting his tie and reviewing the deal documents, he had no idea that a 12-year-old girl had turned his arrogance into a perfect mathematical trap. Victoria closed her notebook and smiled. Phase 1 of what she called Project Balance was complete. All the variables were aligned. All the elements were in place. Now all that remained was to watch William Sterling do exactly what his behavioral patterns predicted he would do when pressured, triple his arrogance and prejudice, especially against people he couldn't control. The difference was that this time the right people would be watching, recording and making decisions that would change everything. What William Sterling didn't know was that he was about to discover that underestimating a 12-year-old black girl would be the most costly mistake of his entire billionaire life, and that Victoria Thompson wasn't just solving a mathematical equation, she was completely rewriting the rules of the game that men like him thought they controlled. Because if there's one thing mathematical prodigies know how to do better than anyone else, it's turning their opponent's arrogance into the very tool of their destruction. At 9 that night, William Sterling adjusted his tie for the 3rd time as he waited for the Yamamoto Corporation delegation at the Grand View. The $400 million deal was just a few signatures away. "Mr. Yamamoto, it's a pleasure to welcome you back," William said, shaking the Japanese CEO's hand. What he didn't notice were the 3 discreet men sitting at nearby tables, each with virtually invisible recording equipment. "Mr. Sterling," Yamamoto replied politely, though his expression was more serious than usual. "Before we proceed, we have some concerns we would like to clarify." William laughed confidently. "Of course, ask anything you like." Just then, Linda approached the table carrying a tray of drinks. William recognized her immediately and felt a familiar irritation. "You still work here?" William asked, his voice dripping with disdain. "I thought we had already made it clear that people like you should know their place." The silence at the Japanese table was instantaneous. Yamamoto exchanged meaningful glances with his colleagues. "And where is that annoying daughter of yours?" William continued, now speaking loudly enough for other tables to hear. "That black child who thinks she's so smart. I guarantee she no longer bothers our important customers." "William," Yamamoto interrupted gently, "may I ask how you usually treat your employees?" "With necessary firmness," William replied without hesitation. "Especially when they are people who don't understand natural hierarchies. It's important to maintain certain standards in quality establishments." Linda continued serving in silence, but her eyes briefly met Yamamoto's, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Interesting perspective," Yamamoto murmured, taking notes on his tablet. "And these natural hierarchies, are they applied in your company as well?" William, misinterpreting the interest, smiled expansively. "Of course, it's fundamental to efficiency. Each person in their proper place, each group with its natural limitations. That's how you build a $2 billion empire." The Japanese continued to ask seemingly innocent questions, and William, convinced he was impressing them with his strong leadership, revealed more and more of his true prejudices. Across the street, Victoria watched everything through the window of the library opposite the Grand View. In her hands, a borrowed cell phone vibrated constantly with notifications. The recordings were already being streamed live to Yamamoto Corporation's official social media accounts. "Perfect timing," Victoria muttered, checking the numbers. 3,000 views and counting. Inside the restaurant, William's phone began to ring incessantly, first his press secretary, then his lawyer, then his accountant. "Excuse me," William said to the Japanese delegation, answering the call from his public relations director. "William, you need to get out of there now. Your statements are going viral on social media. The hashtag Sterling Racist is trending." William paled, looking at the Japanese, who were now watching him with icy expressions. "Mr. Yamamoto, Mr. Sterling," Yamamoto interrupted, rising calmly. Yamamoto Corporation has very clear values regarding diversity and human respect. We consider this agreement definitively terminated. Wait, I can explain. This is a misunderstanding. But the Japanese were already leaving, followed by the stares of the entire restaurant that had witnessed his public humiliation. William's phone rang again. It was the chairman of Sterling Industries. William, you're fired. The board is meeting tomorrow to choose your replacement. Security is already on its way to your home to collect company equipment. As William slumped in his chair, Linda approached to collect the empty glasses. You know, Mr. Sterling, she said calmly, my daughter Victoria has an interesting theory about people like you. She says arrogance is just ignorance disguised as power. William looked at her with growing horror. It was you, a 12-year-old? Victoria isn't just any child, Linda replied with a smile that mixed maternal pride with absolute satisfaction. She understands that true intelligence lies in letting people reveal exactly who they are when they feel secure in their own superiority. As William Sterling watched his $2 billion empire crumble in real time through notifications on his cell phone, a mathematical truth began to form in his stunned mind. He had been calculatedly destroyed by a 12-year-old girl who had turned his own arrogance into the most lethal weapon possible. But Victoria's revenge was just beginning. Because if there's one thing mathematical prodigies know better than solving equations, it's ensuring that every negative variable is completely eliminated from the system. 6 months later, Victoria Thompson was exactly where she had always dreamed of being, at MIT, signing her acceptance letter for the Special Applied Mathematics program with a full scholarship. At 13, she would be the youngest student in the university's history. Your letter of recommendation from Yamamoto Corporation was exceptional, said the director of admissions. They mentioned that you demonstrated practical application of mathematical theory in social contexts with measurable results. Victoria smiled. Yamamoto had not only canceled the agreement with Sterling, but also created a scholarship fund in her name for young prodigies from underprivileged communities. Meanwhile, William Sterling was living his new reality in a small 2-bedroom apartment, working as a freelance consultant after no reputable company agreed to hire him. The video of his racist statements had been viewed by 12 million people, becoming a case study in business schools on how to destroy a career in one conversation. Linda now managed 3 Yamamoto chain restaurants in the United States, after the Japanese corporation hired her as Director of Human Resources, impressed by her dignity during the public humiliation. I knew from the beginning this would happen, Linda told her daughter as they visited the MIT campus. I didn't know, Victoria replied honestly. But I calculated the probability. People like William Sterling always reveal who they really are when they feel superior. I just created the perfect environment for that to happen, in front of the right people. On her last day of school before moving to Boston, Victoria found a letter in her locker. It was from an 8-year-old student at the local elementary school. Thank you for showing me that being smart is not something we should hide. Victoria folded the letter carefully. That girl had understood the real lesson. It wasn't about revenge, but about proving that genuine intelligence always finds a way. The following week, William Sterling saw a news story that made him choke on his coffee. 13-year-old prodigy develops algorithm that prevents discrimination in hiring processes. The photo showed Victoria receiving an award for social innovation. The final irony: the algorithm was being implemented in companies around the world, including several that were once Sterling Industries' biggest suppliers. Victoria Thompson had turned a billionaire's arrogance into the tool of her own rise. She proved that true revenge is not destroying those who harm you. It's building something so brilliant that it renders all the pettiness they tried to use against you irrelevant. Mathematics had spoken. Prejudice is just ignorance disguised as power, and real intelligence always finds an equation to win.